Good evening, everybody. So, the first time I met Andy Acevedo, we went for a walk around her East Austin neighborhood. It's around Springdale and Airport Boulevard. Some of you might know it. If you don't know it, this part of town is under construction, okay?
This is my first time walking on this new sidewalk, so this is really nice.
We grabbed a coffee at a place called Springdale General. It's got a barber shop, art studios. Across the street, we passed some new apartment buildings going up. And then to our left was a brand new office building. It's got kind of a wavy, smooth architectural design.
So there's a big sign that says, coming Q1 2024, Springdale Green.
Now, just like these buildings, Andy is relatively new to town. She's from San Antonio. And when she got here, she wanted to learn more about her new city. So one night, she was watching the movie Erin Brockovich, okay? You know, it's the one starring Julia Roberts. It's like about this crusading environmentalist who takes on big polluters. And Andy wondered if anything like that had ever happened in Austin. And it turns out it had, right where all this development is happening.
Yeah, you'd never think that it was kind of just this big industrial lot for a long time.
But it was, right? This area was the site of a huge environmental controversy. Toxic spills, protests, lawsuits. It's an incredible story. But it also had her wondering about this development. Is all this new construction safe? Is the land still polluted?
I don't know. It's left me with a lot of questions about it.
Now, I'm going to try to answer some of those questions by telling the story of this land. And that story starts with something called tank farms. Okay, these are petroleum storage facilities, places where gasoline, jet fuel, diesel are kept in huge tanks before they go to gas stations and airports. And in this part of East Austin, there were a bunch of tank farms. Of course, well, not at first. At first, they were just farms, right? But you can see from these old aerial photos how the tanks started coming in around the 1950s. And you can see how one tank farm kind of leads to another one being built right in the same area. Now, for the people of East Austin, of course, this was a problem. In the 1920s, the city had instituted racist planning policies that pushed its black and brown residents to the east side, right? These same policies also put most of the polluting industry in the east part of town. So by the mid-1900s, many lower-income black and Hispanic families had no choice but to live next to these big industrial sites.
And so you have hazardous facilities next to schools, you have hazardous facilities next to residents, and that was all impacting the community's health.
So this is Sylvia Herrera. She grew up near the tank farms. She remembers her childhood very fondly, right? But she says people didn't always understand the pollution that these things were exposing them to. That started to change in December of 1991.
At the time, I was a single mom raising 2 children about 2 blocks away from the tank farm.
And that's when she noticed a classified ad in the newspaper. This was a public notice announcing plans to build yet another big tank. And attached to it was a list of the dangerous chemicals it would emit into the air. Benzene, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, gasoline, and diesel fumes. And it occurred to Sylvia,
well, it was just for that one particular tank. But then you start counting the number of tanks that were already there, so you can imagine all the pollution that was coming out of there.
Now, Sylvia had been an activist since she was a teenager, actually. But by this point, she was involved in the local environmental movement with a group called Poder. And they decided they were going to fight the tank farms. First, they developed these health surveys, and they went door to door asking people if they were experiencing problems.
Migraine headaches or respiratory problems like asthma or coughing and having nosebleeds and so forth.
What they found was frightening.
It was like 3/4 of the community was having the same symptoms.
Everyday people started organizing. They wanted to put pressure on local and state officials, sure, but they were also going up some of the biggest companies in the world: Chevron, Citgo, Mobil Oil, Exxon.
We didn't have any money, and here we were fighting these oil giants, but people had the will.
So they held protests outside the tank farms. They organized a toxic tour of the neighborhoods near the tank farms. They turned out big at city council meetings.
Basically, the people around here do not have any money. and the oil company has lots of money.
But there's schools just scattered in there, and there's still going to be neighborhoods out there.
Tengo una niña de 9 años.
Has a child 9 years old.
El doctor dice que tiene asma.
The doctor says that the child has asthma.
These people are demanding something be done for their particular concerns. Thank you very much.
Now, the deeper Sylvia and others dug, the worse the oil companies looked. Toxic waste had seeped from the tanks into the earth and the groundwater under the community. The public had not been informed of dangerous chemical emissions. People were getting sick. And for those living nearby, this seemed like a life or death fight. And for the oil companies, it seemed like very bad publicity. The Travis County attorney even opened criminal investigations into them. And one by one, these oil giants agreed to shut down their tanks and move.
The last holdout was Exxon.
So Poder made plans to go to Houston and announce a nationwide boycott of the company.
The night before we were headed out to do that, Exxon agreed that they would shut down and relocate.
So that is how a group, right? Like I said, an incredible story. That's how a group of East Austin activists took on some of the world's largest oil companies and won. It's like, who needs Aaron Brockovich, right? All right. So this is just the kind of victory you rarely see in these fights. But it also left a mark on the land where the tanks once stood. On my walk with Andy, she pulled out a map of some of the old, I think it was from this old news article showing where the tanks were.
Like Citgo, Exxon, Chevron, Mobil.
So we'd be kind of between, we're on Exxon near Citgo?
Yeah, we're kind of right on Exxon.
Yeah, she says these days most people around here don't know anything about this history, but it has her worried. She says one time she was outside a cafe and all this dust like from the construction started blowing around.
Now looking back at it, I'm like kind of horrified, like, oh, I don't know what else was in there. Was it just dust? Was it contaminated with a bunch of stuff? I don't know.
And she worries like this because when the oil companies left, they did not all clean up their mess. Removing the tanks stopped the air pollution, but the contamination in the ground stayed. Instead of cleaning it, most of these companies reached an agreement with the state to monitor it, to treat some of the groundwater, and simply to prohibit people from ever living where the tanks had been. They would only allow industrial or commercial uses for this land. It was an approach called natural attenuation. Basically, they hoped that with time, the earth would heal itself. Of course, that complicated things for whoever came next.
They left these properties.
So this is the voice of David Gottfried. He's a lawyer who works on real estate cases in Austin.
These properties, back up to residences, as far as I know, and they just left these properties and let the rainwater do what the rainwater is going to do and the earth to do what the earth does, and they would monitor it.
He says a lot of this land just sat vacant. And then one day, in January 2000, a group came along that wanted to buy. They were a religious congregation called La Voz de la Piedra Angular, the voice of the cornerstone, and they eventually became one of David's clients.
They purchased the property in order to establish their church.
While many found former tank farmland undesirable, David says for this particular church, it was perfect. That's because this congregation had some unique beliefs about how much time there was left for them to build.
They believe in the apocalypse. They needed a very large piece of property because they believe that the apocalypse is coming and everybody in the area is going to want to be coming to their church, and so they needed a lot of space.
So they took one of these huge warehouses that stood on the land and they converted it into a place of worship.
And they took out the metal siding and they put in big glass doors to enter into the sanctuary. And the sanctuary was huge. And then they had a stage and an altar.
And they also installed offices, they installed a kitchen, they ran businesses out of the property.
And then behind the building, they made a baptismal pool, and they were performing baptisms.
So I'm pretty sure that you can see this pool in these satellite images, right? In court documents, it says they used an old fuel storage tank for the pool. Yeah. Gottfried, he doesn't quite remember that way, but either way, this caught the attention of the site's former owner, Exxon.
Exxon was very unhappy about that.
Right. Like I said, this land was still contaminated, and under a settlement with the state, the oil companies had agreed to monitor the pollution and to make sure people did not use the land for certain things. Even though Exxon no longer owned this property, it had the power to enforce those restrictions, and it had the reason to. Right? That way, if someone got sick, it would be harder for them to go back and sue the oil company.
They're just minimizing their liability.
Now, the church had not been fully informed of these restrictions, but when Exxon caught wind of what the church was doing, it looked like the end was nigh. The oil company sued the church, right? Exxon wanted the church gone. The company said religious services were not allowed. David, the church's lawyer, argued that they should at least be able to stay and pray. He said there was nothing in the deed that specifically prohibited religious services.
And so I said to the judge, Your Honor, can my clients hold a shareholder meeting on the property? And the judge said yes. And I said, and after that shareholder meeting, can they all stand up and join hands and recite the Lord's Prayer? And she said no. That's my ruling. And we lost the case.
So I think this story tells us a few important things. One, managing pollution is not just about cleaning it up. It's about keeping people away from it. It's also about informing people of the dangers of being near it. But this story also shows how kind of arbitrary those rules can sometimes be, right? The church, of course, is now long gone, but the congregation actually is still around. I think they're out closer to the airport now. And for this story, of course, I reached out to the pastor to try to set up an interview. After months of trying, I finally got him on the phone. He did not want to talk about it. Why? Está en el pasado, he said. It is in the past. And as you'll see, it is. I think the church was literally underneath where this office building is now. I'll have to check. So now we're at a place where maybe we start answering some of Andy's questions. How did this happen? How does a place with such a troubled past become a new office park or a cafe or an art studio? Part of it, and here, welcome to the glamorous world of reporting, part of it has to do with paperwork. Around 2007, Exxon was allowed to stop monitoring and treating the groundwater. Now, pollution remained, but state regulators said that it would not pose a threat to the neighboring communities. Then, in 2014, they changed the deed restrictions. They made it easier to build on the land, again, as long as it was not residential. And we fast forward to 2020, and Austin is in a full real estate boom. By this time, this land is considered, central, and there's a lot of it. But was it still polluted? Yes, it was. In fact, the developers that bought the Springdale Green lot, they took soil samples there to test it, and the test showed that the dirt was about as polluted as it was back when the oil companies stopped monitoring it in 2007, right? The land had not necessarily healed itself. But the site was approved for development. After looking at the tests, state regulators said the soil would be okay to use as fill beneath the new buildings, as long as they remained non-residential. For this story, I talked to someone with Springdale Green Development, and you've got to understand, for them, this is a good news story, right? It's about land that was blighted getting a new life as an office park where no one will grow crops or dig wells or presumably do any more baptisms. Under the law, this is considered an appropriate use, but Andy Acevedo is still not sure.
It kind of blows my mind that it's okay for people to spend, I don't know, however many hours people spend working. Like, how is it any different, really, from living there? So,
there are a lot of ways we could end this story. We could talk about how many of the people that fought off the tank farms were later priced out of the neighborhood that they helped protect, right? This is something that Silvia Herrera is well aware of.
It's sad to see because in a way it's not progress for our community.
We could talk about how this is just one example of something that's happening all over town as real estate booms and developers look to, formerly polluted or polluted land to build on. In fact, there's recently a push to open up currently restricted tank farm land to residential buildings. This is something that David Gottfried saw coming years ago.
That's going to happen when the properties get more and more valuable.
But for this show, I think we'll end it in Andy Acevedo's backyard, where I recently took a soil sample to see if pollution remained by her house near where the old tank farms were. It's actually kind of tricky. You gotta really get in there. Yeah, it's harder than it looks. So, I don't know, Andy, if you're here tonight, if you want to come down, walk down the line this way, and someone's going to help you up on stage. She was brave enough to come up here at the end of the piece. Now, I have the results of the test here, and it's kind of weird, but I asked, and we decided we would share it here tonight. And so I think she's making her way up here. When Andy and I went for our walk, there you are. Hey, how's it going? Good to see you. When Andy and I went for that first walk together, she talked about how she was interested in gardening in her yard, but was understandably concerned, that it could be dangerous. So I got these samples tested by a lab. They tested for all the metals and chemicals that would be associated with petrochemical operations. And then I had the lab manager walk me through the results. And, it seems like a kind of a heavy thing to create this dramatic tension with. But I have the results right here, and it looks as though the land is fine. It's okay. So, I don't know if you have any plans to, anything you want to grow in particular? Or,
Just going to plant as many veggies as possible.
All right, some good veggies we'll have. That's great. This is for you?
Thank you.
And thank you so much for doing this. And thank you all. Thank you all. Have a good night.